open borders, shameful abandonment, disregard for human life, the prospect of more mandates and lockdowns, and the list goes on. Now more than ever, we need to stick together. Voting alone is not enough. We must use our dollars to support like-minded companies that fight for our rights and beliefs. Patriot Mobile is America's only Christian conservative wireless provider who shares your values. Last year, we gave more than $500,000 to conservative causes. With your support, we'll give more than $1.5 million this year. It's time to band together and support companies that truly love America and fight for our freedoms. Will you join us?
Radio, covering the latest state and local issues with Tom Fallbush, Bob Scott, and Jim Waters.
Hello, Kentuckiana. You're listening to Kentucky's Voice on 970 AM WGTK. I'm your special host, Dr. Lance Pearson with the Kentucky Liberty Caucus, as well as the Louisville Tea Party. Most of our coverage today is going to be talking about all of those primary election results, especially on the Republican side, but we might talk about a couple of key Democrat races as well, especially in races that are really going to matter for the general election. So I hope you tune in for the whole show. We're going to have coverage of federal races, state and Senate races, and the last segment, especially, we're going to focus in on some of the Louisville area races that were really important. All right, let me first talk about some of the alternate ways that you can view this podcast/TV show in addition to listening to us on the radio. We are at Kentucky's Voice on Facebook, so you can find that channel on Facebook and see a live stream of this show. We also have a YouTube channel that live streams this content. That is, if you go to YouTube, find Kentucky's Voice again, or the KY Voice, one of those two things. If you go to that, you will find there is a live tab. So that will have the live stream and also an archive of the full-length video. We eventually will clip up that video into segments, and you can watch those in an archive format under the videos tab on YouTube. So I encourage you to do that. We also are rebroadcast on Spectrum TV. So if you have Spectrum TV for your cable provider, you can go to WBNA, which is channel 21 on Spectrum. We will do a rebroadcast of this show at 12:30, 4 p.m., and 7 p.m. So that was a lot of options. We also are a listener-supported program. If you are interested in having state, local, and even some federal coverage, especially today, on your radio or your TV, on Facebook, basically the Louisville area, if you want to have more conservative talk and opinion, there's no better place to find that than on 970 AM in general. And if you want to give to this program, you can do that at kyvoice.org. That's kyvoice.org on your web browser. So I encourage you to go there. You can set up monthly giving, or you can do a one-time gift, and it would be greatly appreciated. As you can imagine, all of those different options for accessing our content is quite expensive, and so we would appreciate any support that you can give. All right. Let me just first do a preface for this show. Again, we're going to cover federal elections. I'm going to have some special guests. The woman with the Twitter handle / I think Instagram and Twitter and a Facebook page that goes by the name Smokahontas, as well as Eddie, who is Mr. Smokahontas, if you will. They're going to be joining us in the second segment where they really talk about all of the on-the-ground work that went into a political election, in particular that Massey race, but also some discussion of the Cameron Barr race. And so I encourage you to stick around for that segment where we get some actual on-the-ground, real experienced perspectives on that race. And again, we're going to cover both federal elections, that's the U.S. Senate, and 2 House races that were quite competitive. We also will be talking about state house and state senate races, which also happened this time. We'll mention a little bit about some of the judge executive races that happened around the state, which is one of the undercurrents of this election. And we finally are going to really focus in on some of the Louisville elections. So stick around for all of that content. All right. My summary, if you want to have the takeaway, is that there were some optimistic things that happened for the Republican Party, but we really need to have a united front in the general election because there are going to be some very competitive races in the general election, and we certainly don't want to have any socialists elected to any of these races, and we don't want to have an expansion of the Democratic Party. All right. Welcome back to Kentucky's Voice. I'm your special host, Dr. Lance Pearson, with the Kentucky Liberty Caucus, as well as the Louisville Tea Party. You're listening to 970 AM WGTK, and we thank you for your listenership. So let's go ahead and get into it. We got a ton of content. There were a lot of really interesting elections, and so we want to talk through that. The first thing that I really want to talk about for our listeners is these elections tend to get very emotional and very heated. And so in our heat and haste, we tend to, if our candidate didn't win or our candidate won, we're either elated or we're depressed, and we start making posts online, or we basically let those emotions kind of carry the day in our online commentary and commentary with people. Ultimately, Christ is still king. All of these elections, they too will pass. There will be another set of elections for many of these same races in as little as 2 years, and so we'll sort all of that out. I do want to encourage people, if you're so infuriated that you're talking about, I'm going to quit all politics and all political engagement, or I'm going to quit the Republican Party. Let me just say, take a deep breath. The alternative is I would describe it as so detrimental to both the state and the country that we ultimately cannot have any of that sort of sentiment. Now, if there's a particular candidate that you don't want to support, more power to you, but do not disengage from the political process. What we need is more engagement, not less. All right. Now, let me emphasize, in a primary election in the state of Kentucky, we usually have dismal turnout. Usually we're talking somewhere in the range of like 12 to 14% turnout, which is unbelievable to me. Most of these elections have actually been decided last night. The winner of a particular primary in probably 80 to 90% of the districts in the state pretty much determines who's going to win the general election. So primaries are crucially important. I did everything I could to try to get people to turn out. And not that it was because of me. We did have much better turnout for this election than we have in recent past. I think it was probably arguably closer to a presidential year election than it is to a midterm. So I think statewide, the overall turnout for this primary election was somewhere around 25 or 26%. So almost twice what is normal for this mid-cycle primary election. So I do want to commend people for turning out. Still, 25% turnout is dismal. Like, let's get engaged in the political process and be involved in choosing who your leaders are. Okay, the first race that we want to talk about in this first segment is going to be focused on the federal elections. The first of those races is probably the contentious race that didn't get quite as much focus in the Louisville area because we didn't have the ability to vote on either of these two candidates. So for U.S. House, I do want to emphasize James Comer was easily chosen. Brett Guthrie had a primary, but he was easily chosen, and Hal Rogers. Those were not really competitive races. All three of those candidates both massively outraised their opponents and are established long-term incumbents, and they had no problem. They all got over 80% of the vote. There was an open seat, however, vacated by Andy Barr in his attempt to run for U.S. Senate, and that race was contested between Dr. Ralph Alvarado, who is a medical doctor, and Ryan Dotson, who, among other things, being a real estate developer as well as a pastor of what I would call a megachurch and also state representative. That was a very contested primary. It was not at all clear to me who was going to win that race until Donald Trump kind of jumped in with an endorsement in the last 2 weeks. That seems to really have swayed the electorate, and that will be a theme in all of these federal races that we're going to talk about. So, producer, can we first bring up a picture of the vote totals for that race? This is Ralph Alvarado versus Ryan Dotson. About over 95% is in. There will be some votes that will trickle in. But as you can see, if you are watching our YouTube or Facebook live streams, Ralph Alvarado seems to have gotten somewhere around 56, 57% of the vote. Ryan Dotson ran a very spirited campaign. He wound up with around 26, 27% of the vote. There was a third Republican candidate. I think he got somewhere in the mid 8% range. But clearly, this was a race between Ralph Alvarado and Ryan Dotson. And my summary of that is that really that Trump endorsement carried the day. Now, I want to read, usually on Wednesday. Oh, and actually, can we go ahead and put that map up? I do want to pick out a couple things. You see, it was widely Ralph Alvarado from this map. The dark red is the areas and how much Ralph Alvarado carried those. He did wind up winning every county within this district. However, the counties that were the closest seemed to be, I think, Estill and Powell. So nevertheless, it was a pretty broad sweep by Ralph Alvarado. Now, and I do want to say we have had Ryan Dotson on our program before. Ralph Alvarado, however, I will say is a legitimate conservative. I have no concern whatsoever in supporting him. And I want to read a statement that our typical Wednesday host, Andrew Cooperrider, made online that I thought would really capture what we should think about this race. Andrew Cooperrider wrote, "Last night needs to be a wake-up call for the Republican Party of Kentucky. Republicans may lose Kentucky's 6th congressional district if they fail to treat that race as their most important contest in November, a true all-hands-on-deck moment. In the 6th district, both the congressional seat and the U.S. Senate seat were open. Not only are both seats currently held by Republicans, but the current Congressman Andy Barr was also on the ballot in that race. Additionally, Republicans hold about a 1,500 vote registration edge over Democrats in the district. In other words, it's red, but it's not deep red. It's a purplish sort of red. When we look at the primary turnout, Democrats actually showed up with roughly 3,700 more voters than Republicans did. I understand that those numbers may shift slightly as the final percentages are counted, but it appears that Democrats had a higher primary turnout. This should be a concern because November will be all about turnout. With some of the recent moves by Republicans, it feels like we are intentionally breaking up the voting coalition that we need to win. I hope everyone recognizes this and directs their much-needed focus to Kentucky's 6th congressional district to help elect Dr. Ralph Alvarado." Now, on the Democrat side, the candidate that will be facing Ralph Alvarado in that Lexington-based congressional seat is Zach Dimbo. Early in the race, this would have been seen as a mild upset. Sherilyn Stevenson got some State party officials, I believe that Jacqueline Coleman may have endorsed her. I'm not sure if Andy Beshear wound up endorsing her early in that race. Zach Dimbo is a former federal prosecutor and outraised her considerably and kind of swamped her a little bit on, radio and TV. So he is a candidate that will require Republican effort to defeat in that race. Take it very seriously. The second race, and we've talked about this one a lot, is the race for Daniel Cameron. He was running against Andy Barr for that U.S. Senate seat. Again, I thought this race was very close. I actually thought that Daniel Cameron, until the Trump endorsement came down, was the favorite in that race. But nevertheless, Andy Barr had substantially more fundraising and was able to carry the message that Trump had endorsed him and talked about how he was a Republican warrior. I'm not sure exactly what that means, but nevertheless, he was able to get that message out to voters. Can we put up the vote totals in that race? So this is the U.S. Senate race between Andy Barr and Daniel Cameron. Ultimately, Andy Barr wound up with around 60% of the Republican vote. Daniel Cameron wound up with around 31% of the Republican vote. And then Michael Farris wound up with a little under 2.4% of the vote in that race. Ironically, someone named George Washington wound up with 1.5% of the vote in that race. It does have a very interesting map, if we can put that map up. In that map, you see that ultimately Andy Barr won most of the counties of Kentucky. The areas that Daniel Cameron did win and where he performed strongest were Hardin and LaRue County, kind of around where he grew up. He lives now in Oldham County. He won Oldham County. He also won Trimble. And there are some pink where Andy Barr, it was more or less a coin flip, and Andy Barr barely won kind of the Shelby, Henry, Nelson County, those sorts of areas kind of in the orbit of Louisville. However, Daniel Cameron did not actually win Jefferson County itself. I think that was Andy Barr wound up winning Jefferson County by somewhere around 16%. And so in the next segment, when I bring on Smokahontas and Eddie, Mr. Smokahontas, we're going to talk a little bit about that race, and then we're really going to talk about the race that I think is on a lot of people's mind, and that is that the race between Thomas Massie, who lost to Trump-backed challenger Ed Gowrine. So after that break. Now, I do want to say I was fairly vocal in my support, and a lot of our hosts were, of Daniel Cameron. Again, the Democrat that won that side of the primaries and will wind up on the general election ballot is Charles Booker. He is a West End Democrat, former U.S. House rep. He's previously run for U.S. Senate, losing by about 20 points, I think, to Rand Paul in a previous election. He is, and I think I'm being fair to him, he is an avowed socialist. And so I do not expect many people that are conservatives or Republicans and frankly, sensible independents to endorse a socialist candidate. And I don't expect that there's going to be a large push to oppose supporting Andy Barr in that general election. I certainly will be voting for Andy Barr in that election, and I encourage you to do the same. All right, after the break, we're going to be joined by Smokahontas to talk about other federal races.
Now, back to Kentucky's Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
All right, welcome back to Kentucky's Voice. I'm your special host, Dr. Lance Pearson, with the Kentucky Liberty Caucus and the Louisville Tea Party. We are joined in this segment by Mr. and Mrs. Smokeahontas. That is what I was told to address them as. That is not any slight, and I'm sure it is a great honor for Eddie to be called Mr. Smokeahontas for this segment.
When we're in Kentucky, I'm Mr. Smokeahontas, and when we're in Texas, she is the mayor's wife. So
okay,
we're in Kentucky, so it's Mr. Smokeahontas.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, let's jump right into it. You all have been basically on the ground, I don't know for how long recently, but Smokeahontas lives in Pikeville most of the time. You all have been campaigning basically for, I don't know, the last month, last several weeks, a little bit for Daniel Cameron and also for Thomas Massie. So let me just get your thoughts on that Daniel Cameron race first, and we'll get into the Massie-Gowrine race here in a minute. So just give me your initial thoughts, feelings. What do you think really swayed the election, and what were your thoughts talking to people on the ground?
I think it's really, really sad. I think Daniel Cameron actually had an opportunity to win that race. I think it was a woefully underfunded campaign.
Yep.
I don't know why, because we talked to people on the ground, and had several people say, I really, really like that Daniel Cameron. I just see more Andy Barr signs.
Yeah.
And so I think it's when you're dealing with a situation of low information voters,
yeah,
and they see more signs, that's the guy they're going to go with.
Yeah.
So
what do you think, Smokeahontas?
I agree 100%. If we could have had a good ground game for Daniel Cameron, he definitely would have won.
Yeah. How much
he stands up for conservative values, and yeah, that's the majority of our Republican voters.
Even the lady yesterday, she's like, I really like him. He's a godly man.
Yeah.
You could tell he's a godly man.
Absolutely. And I don't want to disparage it. He actually wound up with 31% of the vote, and being outspent by literally $8-10 million in this race. The ability of Andy Barr to basically hammer home that Trump endorsement, I think, was really what swung that election. Is that kind of your read on it?
The other thing that I think it's probably fair to say that we saw were a lot of people were marrying him to Mitch McConnell, like the anti-Mitch group were like, oh, he's Mitch's boy, and I was constantly having to correct people, say if he was Mitch's boy, he'd have Mitch's money.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
So where's the money if he's Mitch's boy? That was a constant. How many times?
Countless.
Yeah, countless.
Yeah, I heard that quite a bit too. It never registered for me, but it's hard to get that message out. Okay, let's focus a little bit on this Gowrine Massie race. Can we really quickly bring up the vote totals for that race? I thought that this race, that Massie going in had about a 60% chance to win, which translates to about a 2% advantage on the ballot. That was my expectation. That's not how it turned out. Ed Gowrine wound up winning by somewhere around 9% of the vote. There's still some vote trickling in. 105,000 people wound up voting for it. Can we show the map of that? Gowrine ultimately did win most of the counties. Massie won 2 counties around where he lived. It was relatively close in the Cincinnati suburbs, which has the bulk of the voters, and I believe Gowrine only won by about 4% in Oldham County, which I was quite vociferous in campaigning for Massie in that county. So anyway, let's hear your thoughts. I have actually been to multiple Massie events in the last week, and every one of them I saw these two at it, along with a large group of very passionate supporters, including his, celebration/concession speech last night, his victory party that turned into a concession speech. So let me just talk about that. What were your impressions from Thomas Massie's concession speech party last night? What was the tone of that?
I know a lot of people are going to be upset,
yeah,
and a lot of people are going to be depressed, and I know Mrs. Smokeahontas was very upset last night.
Yeah,
I'm actually positive, believe it or not,
yeah,
because I've seen this before. I'm a 3-time Trump voter.
Yeah,
right. I saw the second election. I saw how it was stolen from him. And when I say stolen, do I think, I actually have a more nuanced view of the stealing. And what I saw with Massey is exactly what I saw with Trump.
Yeah.
Exactly what I saw with Trump. You had a media apparatus that was built around nonstop attacks, which is what they did with Trump. And the ground game, when people are talking about, there was, 5,000 extra ballots that were done from, absentee ballot, or the absentee ballots. What was it? How many? It was 10,000 absentee ballots, right?
10 or 11,000, yeah.
So here's how that works. They go into the old folks' homes and they get old Aunt Mildred and they're like, hey, honey, you need to vote and you're going to have this absentee ballot. Let me help you fill it out. And then they do it. And then it's actually a ground game. And that's what they did when Trump lost his election.
Yeah.
I guarantee you when we start drilling down into that, same exact thing.
Yeah.
So here's why I'm positive and optimistic. Yeah. What I saw last night was what I saw when Trump lost.
Yeah.
There's an energized base that it was in that room. Well, and I was talking with a lot of young people, and he has not lost them.
I agree. I'll just say I was at that, and I want to get your thoughts on that Smokeahontas, but it honestly felt a lot more like a victory speech. Like the energy in the room, there were massive chants that people calling for him to run for president or, run for this seat again. I have no idea what he has planned for the future, but it didn't feel, it wasn't downbeat. It was just like a rallying cry that we're going to stay together and really fight. What were your impressions?
So many influencers came from all over the country to support us here in Kentucky. Beyond blessed. We are beyond blessed. And I've seen a coalition of patriots who back the America First congressman, one of the only America First congressmen.
Yeah.
And I was hopeful. I was sad, but I was very hopeful as I was walking out because Massey does have a future. Don't exactly know what it is, but it's God's will.
Yeah.
And we'll be behind him the entire way.
Yeah.
Just like we were at every event.
Yeah, we had multiple people talking to us. What did we hear last night? We heard president. We heard governor. I heard governor multiple times.
Yeah.
So I see no world in which he doesn't do something after this.
Yeah.
I fail to see that. And one of the things when we were talking last night, I think that he's going to rebound a lot stronger. Yeah. And I think what's going to happen, unlike Trump, he's not going to betray the base when he gets voted back in, whatever it is, whether it be governor or Massey for president. I do see a scenario. It might take, because we lost this race because of the boomers.
Yeah.
I mean, would you agree?
Hang on. Before you even get into that, can we put up that last graphic on the generational divide in the Massey race? So this is some polling that came out on basically by age group. What was the voting breakdown of Massey versus Gowron? You can see up there, if you're 17 to 25, that was Massey by 25, Massey by 56, and 26 to 35, all the way up to 46 to 55 years old. Massey won those by 17 points. But for the age group 56 to 65, Gowron won by 18. And then when you get up to 76 or older, Gowron by 33. So talk about that generational divide and what you think is behind that.
Probably the big one that we had. I had a conversation with an individual, and I told him, I said, if I can show you that Ed Gowron quit the Republican Party when Trump got elected, would you at least take a look at Thomas Massey? And the guy's like, he didn't quit that. He didn't quit. So I showed him. I said, well, here, and I used the AI query, and I showed him, and he's like, well, I can't trust all that stuff. Where'd you get that information from? And I said, well, do you trust Fox News? And he's like, yeah, I trust Fox News. It's like, well, it was Fox News.
Yeah.
Fox News. And he said, I still don't care.
Yeah.
So you can't overcome that. There was nothing I could have said. There was nothing I could have did. Both of us tried. You just could not overcome it. And there was, how many were at that table, hon?
3 or 4.
Yeah. And they wouldn't budge.
Okay. Well, I'm going to actually hold you all over to maybe do a few minutes in the next segment also, just finishing up our conversation on that race. Again, it was a clear win by Gowron. We're not arguing that this overall was a stolen election. There were a lot of factors that worked against Massey, and we'll talk about those over the break.
Now, back to Kentucky's Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
All right, welcome back to Kentucky's Voice. I'm your special host, Dr. Lance Pearson with the Kentucky Liberty Caucus and the Louisville Tea Party. We're continuing our conversation with Mr. and Mrs. Smokohantis, who were active and campaigning for Daniel Cameron as well as for Thomas Massie, and we're kind of getting their feedback. I want to emphasize how much this race ultimately was not about Gowron versus Massie. It was Massie and people that were convinced by Trump to be anti-Massie. That's really the race. Ed Gowron didn't attend any of the debates. He avoided all sorts of policy questionnaires. I still have no idea what his perspective is on the vast majority of things that are important to me, and he's going to have to do one heck of a job in trying to convince people to come over and vote for him in the fall rather than leaving that blank. I'm not advising that, but he's got a lot of work to do. I'm just going to say that. So this is how much Trump threw his weight around in this race. We'll talk about this with Mr. and Mrs. Smokohantis, but the amount of money that was put into this race. This was the most expensive House primary race for either party in American history. By most estimates, we're talking somewhere on the order of $400 per voter in this race were invested in this, and especially in the last month of just constant mailers, smear ads, etc. He recruited the opponent for Massie, who I don't actually think was that great an opponent. He seemed to avoid contact with constituents, but nevertheless, he did win. He basically influenced Fox News to freeze Massie out from any coverage on Fox News for the last 18 months. The only Fox News coverage that Massie got was a 2-minute stint at the very last day of the race on daytime TV, whereas they were doing interviews with Laura Ingraham with Ed Gowron. He apparently put out social media posts, 11 social media posts in the last 72 hours. He or associates tried to create a fake scandal between Massie and a former girlfriend in the last few days of that race. He ultimately smeared Massie for about 18 months and really going back over 3 years, including attacking his wife. He called Massie a moron at the prayer breakfast. So he had the Secretary of War come in and campaign for Massey's opponent the day before the election, which I believe, honestly, is a violation of the Hatch Act, but I don't believe that's going to be prosecuted. And then he did a tele-rally for Andy Barr, for Ralph Alvarado, and for Ed Gowron the day before the election, where he basically contacted almost every Republican in the state and had them get on a little, booster phone call for all of those candidates. Okay, what's your read on it? What factor did you think money played in this race?
A tremendous amount.
Yeah.
Would you?
Yes, I've never seen money like that poured into a race.
No. Yeah.
We had the biggest grassroots movement in all of history, and there just was no competing with that kind of money.
Yeah, we were outspent. I think it was like 2-1. We definitely had the grassroots movement, and we even going into it, we had a rock solid plan. We focused on Boone, Kenton, and Campbell County. Yeah, those three. And so that's where me and her spent the majority of our time. The scariest part of this whole election was we were talking to some of the older people who honestly, in their heart of hearts, believed that Thomas Massey cheated on his wife with AOC and I think whoever the other one was in the commercial.
Ilhan Omar. Yeah, I didn't even mention the AI, the completely fake AI generated ads implying that he was an adulterer, etc.
Yeah. And she can tell you, we talked to that lady, I think it was yesterday, and she was just like, I really liked him, but when he had that affair on his wife with AOC, I just can't get past that.
Yeah.
And so we have a boomer class that is going to be sucked in by AI. And so I think we're really in trouble for the next 5 years. I mean,
yes, I agree.
What you saw? Yeah. We're in trouble for the next 5 years until and that sounds horrible to say it, but until that gets thinned out a little bit. They believed everything that they saw. Hook, line, and sinker. I'm trying to think of anything I'm forgetting. What did you see? Some of the crazy stuff.
That was mine.
Oh yeah, the one guy. Yeah, the one guy when we were talking about the Massey's opposition to the big beautiful bill.
Yeah.
And he's like, yeah, he voted down and he tried to kill Trump's bill. And when I told him, I said, well, his opposition to that was they were doubling the funding for transitioning children. Like, you're not down for transitioning children, right? And he was like, oh no, I can't get behind that. But that bill needed to pass.
Yeah. And so getting a $1,000 or $2,000 tax break and adding on about $10,000 in debt, that was really what was being sold in that. Okay, I want to thank both of you. In a future show, I hope to have both of you on. You have really interesting opinions, and Smokahontas is who I consider my social media expert on scandals in Appalachia, which are almost like a true crime, or something like you might read in a telenovela or see on a telenovela. So we'll bring you back on. Thank you for being on.
She's a little firecracker.
That's right. Right. Thank you all. Thank you all. Okay. Again, I believe $26 million in out-of-state, mostly billionaire financed funding for Ed Gowron in that race, and it really swamped all coverage, especially when combined with a blackout, essentially, of Massey on Fox News, which is the place where many generations, especially our older generations, get almost all their news. Okay, so let's move on to some of the state and local races, or especially state, both House and Senate races. I would say that while it was a gut punch for me personally, because I know both Daniel Cameron and Thomas Massey extremely well, and I generally support both of their perspectives as genuine conservatives. And Thomas Massey is one of the standard bearers of what I would call the liberty movement, both in Kentucky and nationally. So it was a gut punch that he lost, but at the state and state House and state Senate level, there were actually lots of victories. It was actually a very good story for what I consider genuine conservatives. First of all of the people that were endorsed by the Republican Liberty Caucus of Kentucky, which, by the way, I'm not at all affiliated with, all of the incumbents in those races won their races, and they were not particularly close. And so some names to call out for that. Steve Doan had a relatively spirited primary race. Felicia Rayburn, Kim Holloway out in Western Kentucky was being opposed by a former House Agricultural Committee chairman who had also run for ag commissioner, and she won that with, I believe, over 60% of the vote. So that was actually a blowout. Josh Calloway is a name a lot of our listeners have heard. He's been on the show before. He won. The most conservative candidate to replace outgoing state rep Nancy Tate. We had him on earlier this week, I guess 2 days ago, actually. Joe Redmond won his race. So at the state House and the state Senate level, I would say that it could not have worked out better for Kentucky's Liberty Movement, Liberty Caucus, whatever phrasing you want to have for that. And I do want to call out one race in particular that I found just personally inspiring. And the first candidate that we had on our show, on my show, was Cole Cusick. If you remember him, this was actually, I think, last October. We had him on talking about him challenging an incumbent. And that incumbent's name was Kim Banta. And so Cole Cusick is a young guy who has worked for both the Family Foundation and the Commonwealth Policy Center, a genuine and authentic fiscal, constitutional, and social conservative who is interested in going up to Frankfurt and reducing corruption or the perception of corruption in our state government. And so we had him on as the absolute last person that we had on our show right before that election. Cole Cusick managed to win that race by 13 votes. I repeat, 13 votes. So he did wind up taking out that incumbent despite being massively outspent in that race to the tune of, I want to say he was outspent by at least $70,000 in that race. This was in Boone County with a little sliver of Kenton County as well. So if you think that your vote doesn't matter, or you think that messaging and going out and knocking doors, putting in all the work of being a candidate, if you think that that cannot overcome, being outspent by somebody that maybe has a higher name recognition than you do, that is completely false. And so that is one race where 13 votes was the margin of victory, and I'm sure they will do a recount, but I can't recall there ever being a flip of a race where the margin was more than one or two. Usually when they do a recount of a race, maybe 1 or 2 votes, maybe 3 votes flip, but not 13. So that was extremely inspiring, and I want to give a congratulations both to all the people who ran, and I want to emphasize, I am greatly appreciative of all of the people who were willing to run even if they lost. Being willing to put yourself out there on the line, give of your time, your treasure, and just basically being willing to be a public servant. Most of these state level races do not pay very well. So like you think of maybe the president or congressional members at the federal level, they may get paid in the high, the $200,000 range. The president, I think, makes $400,000 a year. Okay. These state legislators make somewhere on the order of $30,000 or $40,000 a year for a part-time job, admittedly, but nevertheless, this isn't something that they are doing to personally aggrandize themselves and make massive amounts of money. So some other races that I thought were important. At the state Senate level, we did have on Dallas Robinson. He finished second in his state Senate race to Benjamin Mudd. Congratulations to Benjamin Mudd. Ultimately, that Jimmy Higdon, the outgoing state senator, in the final week or two was willing to go in and endorse Benjamin Mudd, and I think that really swayed a lot of voters in that race, but congratulations. Bill Wesley, who was challenging Brandon Smith, somewhat narrowly lost his bid to take out that incumbent. Bill's a great friend of the program. And Jeff Hensley, who we had on the program, I believe lost his bid to replace Bill Wesley in that seat by 98 votes. So another very close election.
Kentucky's Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
All right, welcome back to Kentucky's Voice. I'm your special host, Dr. Lance Pearson of the Kentucky Liberty Caucus and the Louisville Tea Party. If you've been listening to our coverage, we've talked about the federal elections, the primaries that just happened yesterday. We've also talked quite a bit about the state House and the state Senate races. Now, in this last segment, we're really going to focus in on Louisville area politics. But let me single out a couple of other people throughout the state who won. Incumbent Matt Deneen in Hardin County is a state senator. He managed to defeat Lewis Grider, who was running against him. And from what I've heard, Grider did not run a very vigorous campaign. I think Deneen wound up winning by over 80%. I mean, he got over 80% of the vote. Let me see if there was anything else. Kim Holloway defeated Richard Heath. Josh Calloway won his election over Julie Cantwell. District 14, Wes Pate won. I believe he was the more conservative of those two options in that race. Ryan Bivens, who's been on the program and is an expert in ag issues, he won his race handily. He's from LaRue, I want to say Greene County, anyway, that area. Cole Cusick, as we talked about, very narrowly won by, at last count, 13. Kim Mosier defeated Scott Berger in Northern Kentucky. That's District 64. Steve Doan was reelected. Mike Fisher won the election in an open seat. I believe he was the more conservative of the candidates. Daniel Konstantinopoulos, he won District 73. Again, I think he was probably the more conservative of those candidates in that race. And so if you are a conservative, and if you're a listener to this program, you're probably a Christian conservative. There were lots of, at the state and state House and the state Senate level, there were lots of great results. And I don't think you should be at all discouraged. I'm actually at the state House and the state level, I think that our state legislature is going to be more conservative than it has been in the past. Okay, let's focus in on Louisville area races. The biggest two races, I'll say the biggest two races that we had was for the U.S. House seat, which is currently occupied by Morgan McGarvey. That race was won fairly handily by a person that we had on the show on Monday, Maria Rodriguez. She will be the Republican nominee for that race against Morgan McGarvey. I don't want to sugarcoat things. Morgan McGarvey, with the advantage of Democrat registration in in Jefferson County and Louisville, which that district covers almost all of Louisville. That's an uphill battle, but if anyone can do it, it's Maria Rodriguez. Her story is incredible. Cuban immigrant. She's now a trauma nurse, and I believe at U of L. And so she's accomplished so much already. If anybody's going to have a spirited campaign and take out Morgan McGarvey in that seat, it probably would be her. The other huge race that we had was for Louisville mayor. And overall, my summary for Louisville is the conservative grassroots organizations around the city and the Jefferson County GOP have had an excellent working relationship really since Don Fitzpatrick took over the Jefferson County GOP. So I want to give a shout out to Don Fitzpatrick. He has done a great job of integrating all of the different wings of the Jefferson County Republican Party together and getting us all pulling in the same way. And that has resulted in a lot of success and potentially having a Republican or a conservative, given that it's nonpartisan now, a conservative majority on the Metro Council is quite possible even this cycle. So a lot of progress has been made, and I think it's cooperation that has been the source of that. The Louisville mayor race, however, is the one down spot, I would say. The two candidates that moved forward to that was Mayor Greenberg, which most people assume that was, almost inevitable, and Shamika Parrish-Wright, who is an avowed socialist. I believe she was endorsed by the Democratic Socialists of America. So those will be the two options that you have on that fall ballot. I don't imagine that Mayor Greenberg is going to have much of a challenge defeating her, but nevertheless, we certainly can't have a socialist in that seat. But let me talk a little bit about the Metro Council. Currently, the Metro Council, which has 26 members, is broken down by previous party affiliation. I don't really know how we're talking about these elections where people kind of know what party people are a member of, but they're nonpartisan elections. Anyway, 13 Democrats, 12 Republicans, and 1 independent. And so there is a tight balance. There's enough representation of both parties that they actually have to agree on things, and to some extent that's actually a great positive. So for Metro Council, there were some primaries that got sorted out. Jeff Hudson, and I may not get the numbers for these races, but Jeff Hudson in District 23, kind of South End area, he was the incumbent. He won with over 50% of the vote in that primary. I expect that he will have a very strong chance of winning that race. Lonnie Joseph was able to move on to the general election. There were 4 people in that race. He finished in the top 2. And so I believe that's District 21. Don't quote me on that, but basically just west of the airport, of the Muhammad Ali Airport. We have had on Lonnie Joseph, I think 2 weeks ago, and great candidate. Monday we had on Nancy Lynn Walters, who is going to be on the general election ballot. She was able to proceed. She will be challenging current incumbent Marcus Winkler in the East End. So kind of Anchorage area, Springhurst, all the way over to the Oldham County line. And so I think she's actually a phenomenal candidate, and that is a real pickup opportunity. Let's see. There were some races on the Democrat side. I do want to give a shout out to Ray Friendly C. Barker. I think he is seeking to represent District 5 on the Metro Council. And the last cycle, he barely lost. I want to say, 14 votes or something to the incumbent in that race. There was a bit of a legal challenge over that. But he's actually I believe he is a Democrat, but he has been a very reasonable Democrat, doing a lot of social justice work, and many people know him as Friendly C from some of the Metro police commercials back in the day. So he had previously been running a charitable organization in the West End. So he's going to be proceeding to the general election. All right. I do want to also single out some of the state house races that were involved Jefferson County. Brett Schultz, who we had on the show, I believe a week and a half ago, he was able to proceed. He will be challenging Lisa Wilner on the general election ballot, but he did proceed through his primary. And great guy. He was on the show. Again, he represents that area just west of the Muhammad Ali International Airport. And so he will be there. Julie Rocky Adams in the East End. She is a sitting state senator. She was able to win her primary election, and she will be moving on to the general election against a relatively strong Democrat. I believe she was a former member of the school board. I think her name is Sarah McIntosh. So that will be a somewhat spirited campaign, although Julie has a long history in that seat. So I think she will be able to pull that out. Okay. Let me just talk a little bit about a couple races that on the Democratic side that drew a lot of interest. The state Senate race to, I believe this is District 7. Currently, Lindsay Titchener is in that seat. It's kind of the Prospect area, Oldham County, and Trimble County. She did not have a primary. There were two relatively strong Democrat candidates that there will be a spirited general election there. I believe the person that won is named Christian, maybe Furman. Either way, I believe that she's a medical doctor that lives in Northeast Jefferson County. So we will need some support in that race. There was also a race that Daniel Grossberg, who is a Democrat representative, like inside the Watterson, he has been through several accusations of sexual harassment and ethics violations, ethic complaints before the State General Assembly. He was taken out in that primary. So that drama is likely to go down. We won't have to hear quite as much about that. He was a businessman, and I do want to emphasize that in that race, there were 4 candidates. One of the candidates that was in that race got caught on camera removing literature from a mailbox that was there for another candidate. I believe it was actually Daniel Grossberg. He was pulling out mailers and got caught on camera. He then ultimately decided, because I actually think that might be a federal offense to go into someone's mailbox and remove content. He dropped out of the race before that, reducing it down to a 3-person race. And I think Grossberg actually finished 3rd in that race. Okay. So the overall summer, and I want to give one shout out also to Everett Corley. Everett Corley is running for a state Senate race against Karen Berg. Karen Berg has been famous in our coverage for some of the more ridiculous antics in our state General Assembly, including talking about minor attracted persons, which most people would call pedophiles. Basically talking about those on the House floor and defending sex dolls. She got into a little spat with Lindsay Titchener, in which she asked if she found drag shows sexually exciting to her. So a rather unusual candidate, but she is an incumbent, and that is a heavily Democrat district. So Everett Corley will be running against her in the fall. And so that's our coverage today. I want to thank everyone that ran for races. I also want to thank all the voters. We did have better but not enough turnout on Tuesday, and I want to have Republican solidarity in the fall. That would be my takeaway message.